The station wagon didn't just die, it was murdered. That might sound dramatic, but when was the last time you saw a brand new American-made station wagon sitting on a dealership lot? I'm not talking about a lifted crossover or a hatchback masquerading as an SUV. I mean a proper, long-roof, wood-paneled cruiser. If you're racking your brain, don't worry, because you'd have to go back to 1996, the year the Chevrolet Caprice and Buick Roadmaster finally rolled off the line for the last time. That is a long time ago. But here's the thing, to understand why they disappeared, we have to understand why they ruled the world in the first place. And I spend way too much time thinking about dead automotive segments. If you're someone who obsesses over car culture history and the economics of why we drive what we drive, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Let's start with a number that is going to sound absolutely fake, but I promise you it is real. In 1976, American car buyers could choose from 62 different station wagon models. 62! To put that in perspective, that is more variety than the entire SUV market offers today in many segments. In that same year, wagons accounted for 10% of every single vehicle sold in the United States. Nearly 1 million brand new wagons hit the road in a single year. They were as inevitable as taxes. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, your childhood likely smelled like stale Cheerios, vinyl seats, and the exhaust fumes wafting into that rear-facing third row while you made faces at the truck drivers behind you. But in just 20 years, that number went from 62 models to 0. It is arguably the fastest collapse of a major vehicle segment in industrial history. Now, you might be thinking, well, styles change. People just wanted minivans. And sure, that is part of it, but the story of the station wagon is actually a story about the American identity. Look, to get why this matters, we have to go back way further than the Brady Bunch. We have to go back to the early 1900s. Back then, the train was the center of the universe. If you were traveling, you took a train. But when you got off at the station, usually with a mountain of luggage, you had a problem. You needed a vehicle that could haul you and your trunks to your final destination. Taxis were too small. Trucks were too dirty, so independent manufacturers started buying Model T chassis from Ford and building custom wooden boxes on the back. They called them depot hacks. Depot for the train station and hack as slang for a taxi. Here's what most people don't realize. Ford didn't even want to build them at first. It was just guys in sheds with carpentry skills. But by 1929, the demand was so undeniable that the Big Three finally said, okay, fine, we will make them ourselves. And that is how the station wagon was born. It wasn't a family car, it was a commercial workhorse. But then a weird psychological shift happened. Because these early wagons were made of wood, and because wood requires a ton of maintenance, we're talking annual varnishing and tightening bolts, they became status symbols. Only wealthy people who had staff to maintain their cars drove Woodies. It was the 1930s equivalent of driving a G-Wagon. It signaled that you had money to burn. By the time steel technology caught up in the late 40s, specifically with the 1946 Willys station wagon and the 1949 Plymouth Suburban, the public was already hooked on the look of wood. That is why for the next 40 years, we slapped fake vinyl wood grain on the sides of steel cars. We were trying to hold on to that pre-war prestige. But the real explosion, the moment the wagon went from a niche luxury item to the default setting of American life, was the 1950s. This is where the data gets wild. In 1950, station wagons were less than 3% of car production. By 1960, they were nearly 17%. Why? Because America physically changed. We built the interstate highway system. We invented the suburb. Suddenly, you didn't live near where you worked, and you didn't live near your extended family. You needed a machine that could cross continents. The station wagon became the mobile living room. And I use that term literally because these things were massive. Take the 1968 Ford Country Squire. It was over 18 feet long. That is longer than a modern Chevy Tahoe. It could seat 9 people. It had a V8 engine that was 7 liters or larger. It was a land yacht. And the engineering was surprisingly innovative for the time. You had the Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser with glass skylights so the kids could watch the clouds. You had GM's clamshell tailgate in the 70s, where the glass slid up into the roof and the gate slid down under the floor, disappearing like magic. It was the golden age of American optimism. Gas was cheap, the roads were wide, and we built cars that reflected the idea that resources were infinite. But, and there is always a but in these stories, this dominance was built on a house of cards. The station wagon had a fatal flaw that nobody noticed while the economy was booming. They were incredibly inefficient. I don't just mean fuel economy, though getting 8 miles per gallon was standard. I mean space efficiency. To seat 9 people, you needed a vehicle the size of a school bus because the engine was in the front, the drive shaft ran down the middle, and the suspension was rudimentary. You were driving a lot of metal to move a moderate amount of people. And this brings us to the first villain in our story. It wasn't a person and it wasn't a competitor. It was a date, October 1973, the oil embargo. Almost overnight, the price of gas quadrupled. It went from being something you didn't think about to something you had to ration. People were waiting in lines for hours just to get 10 gallons of fuel. Now imagine you own a 5,000-pound Chrysler Town & Country that gets 9 miles to the gallon. Suddenly, that car isn't a symbol of freedom, it's an anchor dragging your bank account to the bottom of the ocean. This is where it gets really interesting. The logic would suggest that everyone would switch to small economy cars, right? And they did, for a bit, but Americans have a very specific psychology. We refuse to downgrade. We wanted the space of the wagon, but we couldn't afford the gas. The manufacturers were in a panic. They tried to shrink the wagons, making them lighter and smaller, but they just ended up looking like sad, compromised versions of the glory days. The sales numbers started to slide. In 1974 and 1975, the bottom fell out of the full-size wagon market. Chrysler actually looked at the sales charts, saw the cliff, and said, "We're out." They killed their full-size wagons in 1978. But the wagon didn't die just because of gas prices. If that were true, they would have come back in the 80s when gas got cheap again. No, something else happened. The wagon had an image problem. By 1980, the station wagon wasn't the car of the successful young family anymore. It was the car your uncool parents drove. It was the symbol of a boring, regulated suburban existence. If you were a boomer gaining purchasing power, the last thing you wanted was the vehicle that reminded you of being yelled at in the back seat. You wanted something that felt new. And boy, did the industry have something new waiting in the wings. This is the part of the story where most people point to the minivan and say that's the killer. And look, the 1984 Dodge Caravan was a masterpiece of packaging. It was shorter than a wagon, but had way more room inside. It was front-wheel drive, so the floor was flat. It was the logical successor. But I'm going to argue that the minivan was just an accomplice. The real killer, the one that buried the hatchet in the wagon's hood, was something far more insidious. It wasn't about practicality, it was about fantasy. That fantasy wore hiking boots and a flannel shirt. I'm talking, of course, about the sport utility vehicle. Now, SUVs had existed for a long time. The Chevy Suburban dates back to the 30s, and the Jeep Wagoneer was around in the 60s. But those were trucks. They rode like farm equipment because, well, they were farm equipment. You didn't buy one unless you actually needed to tow a horse trailer or cross a muddy field. But in 1984, the same year the minivan arrived, Jeep dropped the Cherokee XJ. This is a critical moment in automotive history. The Cherokee was different. It was smaller, it was built on a unibody frame like a car, not a body-on-frame like a truck, but it looked tough. It sold the image of the American frontier. Then, in 1990, Ford released the Explorer, and that was effectively the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. The Explorer was comfortable, it had leather seats, and it drove reasonably well. But crucially, it sat high. And this psychological shift cannot be overstated. In a station wagon, you sat low, looking up at the world. In an SUV, you sat high, looking down on traffic. It gave drivers a sense of command seating, a feeling of safety and superiority. We convinced ourselves we needed four-wheel drive and 10 inches of ground clearance to survive the treacherous journey to the Bed Bath & Beyond parking lot. The data backs us up. 99% of SUVs never go off-road. We traded the actual practicality of the wagon for the perception of capability. But, and here's what most people don't realize, the death of the wagon wasn't just caused by consumer taste. There was a government assassin hiding in the bushes. It's called CAF, Corporate Average Fuel Economy. These standards were introduced in the 70s to force automakers to build more efficient cars. But there was a massive loophole. The government defined cars and light trucks differently. Cars, which included station wagons, had to meet very strict fuel economy targets. If a manufacturer's fleet of cars didn't hit a certain MPG average, they paid huge fines. Light trucks, however, had much lower, more lenient standards. So put yourself in the shoes of a Ford executive in 1995. You can build a Ford Taurus station wagon. It's expensive to engineer to meet the strict car emission standards, and you can only sell it for, say, $20,000. Or you can take that same chassis, put a tall, boxy body on it, call it an Explorer, and because it's classified as a light truck, you don't have to worry as much about fuel economy. Plus, and this is the kicker, customers will pay $30,000 for the Explorer because it looks cool. It costs roughly the same to build both vehicles, but the SUV had a massive profit margin and fewer regulatory headaches. It was a no-brainer. The regulations designed to save fuel actually encouraged automakers to kill their efficient wagons and push everyone into thirsty trucks. Talk about perverse incentives. By the mid-90s, the writing wasn't just on the wall, it was carved in stone. The collapse was total. In 1991, the wagon market was already hemorrhaging. By 1996, General Motors, the company that had pioneered the steel wagon, threw in the towel. They discontinued the Chevrolet Caprice and the Buick Roadmaster. I want you to look up a picture of a 1996 Buick Roadmaster Estate. It is a glorious, bloated beast with an LT1 Corvette engine under the hood. It was the final dinosaur roaring at the meteor. When those production lines stopped, the era of the American full-size wagon was officially over. The stats from this era are depressing if you're a wagon fan. By 2004, there were only 26 models left in the US, and almost all of them were European imports. By 2016, that number had dropped to 8. The Ford Taurus wagon, gone in 2005. The Ford Focus wagon, gone by 2008. The segment didn't just shrink, it evaporated. However, nature abhors a vacuum. As the wagon died, something weird happened. Manufacturers realized that people still needed the utility of a wagon, they just refused to be seen in one. So they started playing a game of hide the wagon. The master of this game was Subaru. In 1994, Subaru had a slow-selling wagon called the Legacy. They had no money to develop a new SUV to compete with the Ford Explorer. So, in a moment of desperation, or brilliance, they took the Legacy wagon, lifted the suspension a few inches, slapped some rugged plastic cladding on the wheel arches, and called it the Outback. They marketed it with Paul Hogan, Crocodile Dundee himself, driving through the Australian bush. They didn't call it a wagon, they called it the world's first sport utility wagon. And America ate it up. It was a massive hit. But let's be real, it was just a station wagon wearing hiking boots. This proved a theory that still holds true today. Americans will buy station wagons, as long as you don't call them station wagons. This gave birth to the crossover segment. Look at a Honda CR-V, a Toyota RAV4, or a Ford Edge. Strip away the marketing and what are they? They are unbody vehicles based on car platforms with a rear hatch and a cargo area. They are tall station wagons. That is it. The station wagon didn't really die, it just entered the witness protection program. It put on some weight, got a lift kit, and changed its name to crossover. But for the purists, for the people who loved the driving dynamics of a car, the low center of gravity, the better handling, the aerodynamics, the crossover is a poor substitute. A real wagon drives like a sedan but hauls like a truck. A crossover drives like, well, a tall sedan. It leans in corners, it catches the wind, it's a compromise. And yet, the market has spoken. Today, the traditional wagon is basically a zombie. It's technically alive, but only thanks to European life support. Brands like Audi, Volvo, and Mercedes still sell them here, but they are niche luxury products. They call them Avants or Tourings or Estates because station wagon is still a dirty word in marketing departments. And the sales numbers for these survivors are microscopic. In 2015, wagons accounted for just 1.1% of all U.S. vehicle sales. That is 188,000 units. To put that in perspective, Ford sells that many F-Series trucks every 8 weeks. The Cadillac CTS-V wagon, a 556 horsepower supercharged monster that journalists drooled over, nobody bought it. The Buick Regal Tour X, a fantastic, affordable, good-looking wagon introduced in 2018, dead by 2020. It seems that every time a manufacturer tries to bring a real wagon back, the American public looks at it, says that's cool, and then goes and buys the SUV sitting next to it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so they are gone. Who cares? Technology moves on. But we lost something important when we let the wagon die. We lost a specific kind of honesty in our vehicles. The station wagon didn't try to be something it wasn't. It didn't pretend it was going to climb Mount Everest. It didn't pretend it was a race car. It was a tool for living. It was designed for the reality of family life. Groceries, dogs, lumber, road trips, not the fantasy of an active lifestyle that most of us don't actually lead. We also lost variety. Walk through a parking lot in 1970 and you saw coupes, sedans, convertibles, hardtops, and wagons. Walk through a parking lot today and it's a sea of gray blobs. Every crossover looks roughly the same because they are all designed to maximize the same aerodynamic and safety regulations, while chasing the same rugged but premium aesthetic. The distinct personality of the American road has been flattened out. But this brings us to the big question. Is there any hope? Is the wagon dead forever, or is everything cyclical? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. There are some signs, faint, weak pulse signs, that the wind might be shifting again. And ironically, the thing that might save the wagon is the same thing that helped kill it: efficiency. See, we are entering the era of the electric vehicle. And in the EV world, aerodynamics are God. With a gas car, if you have the aerodynamics of a brick, you just burn a little more fuel, no big deal. But with an EV, air resistance directly kills your range. SUVs by definition are tall, blocky, and inefficient. They fight the wind. Station wagons, however, are low, sleek, and long. They slice through the air. Physics is suddenly back on the wagon side. We're already seeing this happen, though manufacturers are terrified to admit it. Look at the Porsche Taycan Cross Turismo. Look at the upcoming Audi A6 e-tron. Look at the Hyundai Ioniq 5. They are long, they have rooflines that extend to the back, and they sit lower than traditional trucks. They are wagons. They are absolutely station wagons. But the marketing teams are doing everything in their power to call them shooting brakes or active tourers or literally anything else. But the form factor is returning because physics demands it. If we want EVs that can drive 400 miles on a charge, we can't keep driving around in boxes. We might be witnessing the rebirth of the wagon, disguised as the aerodynamic future of mobility. But beyond the engineering, there's a cultural shift happening too. The cool factor is cyclical. For the boomers, wagons were the symbol of boredom. But for millennials and Gen Z, we didn't grow up with them. To us, an SUV is the boring mom car. The station wagon is the counterculture choice. It's the choice that says, I don't need to follow the herd. This is evident in the explosion of popularity for vintage wagons. Go to any Radwood car show, those are the shows dedicated to 80s and 90s cars, and you will see crowds swarming around old Volvo 240s and Chevy Caprices. A clean, wood-paneled Buick Roadmaster that you couldn't give away in 2005 is now selling for $20,000, sometimes $30,000 on auction sites. We are nostalgic for a time we barely remember. We are craving that authenticity. In a world of plastic crossovers that all look like angry electric shavers, a boxy, honest station wagon feels like a breath of fresh air. It feels real. And that brings me back to the core of why this matters. It isn't just about metal and rubber. The death of the station wagon teaches us a harsh lesson about American consumerism. We don't buy what we need, we buy who we want to be. We buy SUVs because we wanted to be rugged adventurers, even if we work in accounting. We killed the wagon because we didn't want to be seen as practical suburbanites, even though that is exactly what we were. We traded the best tool for the job for a costume. I often wonder what the roads would look like if we had just been honest with ourselves. Imagine a modern American-made station wagon today. Picture a car with the comfort of a Lincoln, the space of a minivan, the handling of a sports sedan, and the fuel economy of a hybrid. It wouldn't need to be 10 feet tall. It wouldn't need aggressive off-road plastic cladding. It would just be a beautiful, long-roofed machine designed to eat up highway miles. It makes so much sense that it hurts. But we are stubborn creatures. We like our command seating positions. We like feeling big. And until gas hits $10 a gallon, or until the government forces us out of our high-riding castles, the traditional American wagon will likely remain a museum piece, a relic of a time when the American dream fit comfortably in the back of a Ford Country Squire, right next to the cooler and the Golden Retriever. So I have to turn this over to you because I genuinely need to know where you stand on this. I want you to go down to the comments right now and answer me this. Do you remember riding in the way back? If you're old enough to remember those rear-facing seats, tell me, was it the best seat in the house or was it a nausea-inducing torture chamber? I have heard both sides of that story, and I want the truth. Also, let's play a game of what if. If Ford or Chevy announced tomorrow that they were bringing back a full-size rear-wheel drive station wagon, maybe a modern Chevelle Wagon or a new Galaxy 500 Country Squire, would you actually buy it? Be honest. Or would you look at it not appreciatively and then go buy the Explorer because it's easier to load the kids into? And for the car enthusiasts watching, what is the greatest wagon of all time? Is it the Volvo 850R, the Mercedes E63 AMG, or is it the classic Griswold family truckster? I want to see a war in the comments section about which long roof reigns supreme. Personally, I think we made a mistake. I think we threw away the perfect family vehicle because we were too insecure to drive it. The station wagon didn't deserve to die. It was loyal, it was capable, and it was the backbone of the American road trip. It was the victim of a perfect storm, an oil crisis, a regulatory loophole, and a massive shift in our collective ego. But as I look at the new crop of EVs hitting the market, I can't help but smile. Because no matter what they call them, no matter how much plastic cladding they glue to the fenders, I know the truth. The wagon is trying to come home. It just goes to show that you can kill a segment, but you can't kill physics. The long roof will always have a place on the road, even if it has to wear a disguise to get there. It is a reminder that sometimes the old ways were actually the best ways, and we were just too distracted by the shiny new thing to notice. This has been Engine File. We dig into the history, the numbers, and the psychology of the cars you love and the ones you've forgotten. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the murder of the station wagon, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We have got a lot more automotive mysteries to solve, from the rise of the pickup truck to the strange disappearance of the personal luxury coupe. You don't want to miss what we have coming up next. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Keep the shiny side up, and maybe, just maybe, save a little space in your garage for a wagon. You never know when they might come back in style.